Well, hello, Newfoundland and Labrador, and wherever you may be listening to this from. Welcome to another episode of TalkNL. My name is Rudy Norman, and of course, this is the show or the podcast or whatever you want to call it, where we talk about everything Newfoundland and Labrador and those things that are affecting people here in the province. We've got a great show again for you this evening, so thank you all for tuning in. I do want to remind you that if you have any comments or questions or anything as we go through here tonight, please leave them down below, whether you're watching on Facebook or YouTube or wherever. And of course, once again, I am joined by my trusty sidekick. I think that's what we decided last week we were going to call him, Mr. Graydon Pelley. How's it going, Graydon?
Going very well, Rudy. Thanks. I think I'm going to refer to you from now on as the man with all the connections.
I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, Graydon.
Well, depends, what the need is and who you need, whatever.
My wife.
What's that?
My wife always says that. She said, you've got a guy for everything. Whatever you need done, you got a guy that can get you that. So you're not wrong there. So Graydon, it's been an interesting week. Things have been shaping up here in the province. We're going to take a little bit of a different turn here on this week's episode. We'll talk about that in a second. But I did want to just quickly bring up one thing, Graydon. We did receive some sad news on Sunday. You and I were affected by this. A gentleman that we knew and admired and looked up to. In central Newfoundland, suddenly was taken from this world. Pastor Ralph Benson, he was a well-known community member there in Gander, and we just want to say that we're sending out our thoughts and considerations to everybody in Gander, and that was connected to our new Pastor Benson, and of course his family, his wife, his children, his grandchildren, who he really loved. And I know you got to know him and really admired him as well as I did.
Yeah, and certainly. And first of all, condolences to the family and everyone that's affected by this tragic loss. And Pastor Ralph was certainly a man that was community oriented, and his heart was for the community. And we can see the effects of his ministry and the work that he had done throughout central Newfoundland and other parts of the province as well. And it's sad when you see anybody go in such a tragic manner, and especially to see someone that you knew and you saw the great work they were doing to be taken so tragically and quickly from his family and friends.
It was definitely a shock when we got the news early on Monday. And I mean, for me, I knew Ralph or Pastor Benson as a guy who really loved people. He had he was known to say he had a heart for people, and no matter who they were or what their background was, he was a great help, and he's going to be very missed. And we saw a lot of tributes and stuff pouring in, and a lot of support for his families, which is great to see. So, condolences once again to everybody involved, and we're going to miss Pastor Ralph Benson for sure. So, great this evening. I mean, I'm very excited about this. I mean, when we started this little endeavor that we've got here, this TalkNL thing, I remember you and I having the conversation that we wanted to bring about issues that were facing people in this province. Most of all, that was the purpose of this.
Yes.
And I mean, of course, it grew into a little bit of a political podcast as the province got more politically involved with the election and stuff. But this week, I think we're going to move back to talking about a very important subject. And we've got some very special guests here. Todd and Kim Churchill are joining us this evening. Let's bring them on. Hello, folks. How are you?
Hi. It's a pleasure to be here.
Good to have you. So for those of you who don't know or are not familiar with the Churchills, just some background. I think it was probably in the 2019 election. Was that be correct when you guys kind of came to prominence?
Yeah, it's probably even before that. We first went public with Carter's story in the fall of 2017. We had
Okay.
been fighting for about a year before that behind the scenes, and we just weren't getting any traction on it. So we decided to take the extreme step to go public.
Yeah. So Todd and Kimberly, like you said, your son Carter is hearing impaired, and so you guys have an incredible story that, I mean, you know, like you said, you've gone public with, and we'll definitely touch on. But the thing that I first heard about with you guys was the hashtag. Now I might mess it up. Was the hashtag Deaf Children Matter? Was that?
Yep.
Yeah. So I mean, so tell us about. I mean, you know, just maybe a quick synopsis, because I know you've told the story before, and you're probably I doubt you're tired of telling it. But I mean, what brought you here? What happened, and where did you? Maybe Todd, you can start. Where did you start with all this in 2017?
Carter started school in the 2016-2017 school year, and we had attended an ISSP meeting at the school in the May before he started school. And I always say that I feel so guilty about his kindergarten year. I really do. It just gnaws at me to this day that we were so trusting and so naive that the people responsible for Carter's education actually knew what they were doing and actually would put the proper supports in place. And you're so naive, and you're given all these terms like AVT and IRT and deaf itinerant, and it all sounds so great as a parent because you don't know any different. And when your deaf child actually starts school, what you find out is you might get 1 hour per week with a person, and you might get 45 minutes a week with another person, and it's very limited. And when you boil it down, it's nothing. And to give that context, in kindergarten, Carter received only an hour and a half to 2 hours every 7 school days with a teacher that could communicate with him. That's all he got. And the rest of the time, he was with a regular teacher who had no ability to talk to Carter, surrounded by hearing classmates who had no ability to talk to Carter. We had a meeting with Brian War, who was the minister at the time back in 2019. And we said to Minister War, we said, if you went to Confederation Building every single day and nobody ever spoke to you, you saw everybody else at Confederation Building at the cafeteria and in the hallways talking to each other, socializing, making jokes and chatting, but they didn't talk to you because they don't speak your language. How isolating do you think that would be if that was your reality every single day? Yeah. That was Carter's reality and continued to be his reality until this year.
Yeah. So let me just clarify a couple things. So Carter was born hearing impaired, was he, or?
He's actually deaf. Actually, hearing impaired is. I have to correct you because hearing impaired is not a good term to use.
Okay.
The correct terms would be hard of hearing or deaf.
Okay.
So if you have some degree of hearing loss, you would be hard of hearing, and if you are profoundly deaf, as Carter is, you would be called deaf.
Okay.
And we don't take any offense because we had to learn the terminology as well, because we consider deaf to be a bit of a harsh term, but it is actually the correct term.
I'll be honest with you. That's and I thought I was being sensitive by saying that. So that shows you how much I know.
I feel your pain because we had the same learning curve as well.
Yeah. So so he was born deaf, right? So yes. So you mentioned. I mean, okay. So I'm just picturing this now, and Graydon, I promise I'll let you talk eventually. So I'm just picturing this now. So I mean, you've got 4 years. You know that Carter's going to be going to school. So you're probably thinking in the back of your mind, okay, obviously the school is going to adapt and the resources are going to be there to help our son. I'm assuming that's what you're thinking, is it? Or yeah. So what did what were you told, or what impression were you given when you had that meeting before Carter started kindergarten, and basically you went in and said, okay, listen, we have a deaf child, so what are you guys going to do for us? Kim, what did they tell you?
So it's really frustrating because, as Todd said, in hindsight, looking back, we were very naive. We were very trusting in what was being told to us. And we were simply told that, Carter will have a teacher of the deaf that will be with him, that will help him with his sign language and acquire his language. I was, wonderful, thank goodness. I was relieved, and we both were, because we thought, well, this is what we were looking for. This is what he needed. The irony behind it is, of course, we quickly found out within the matter of weeks of school starting that this simply was not the case. This what we thought he should have and what he has a right to have, similar to all hearing children, which is a full-time teacher of the deaf. He only got to see this teacher of the deaf, like Todd said, only an hour to an hour and a half every 7 days. And it just, how can you possibly learn, one, your language, but also the curriculum? This is the first year, 2016 was the first year that students had to attend full day kindergarten. So this was a big deal. If the government felt that going to school full time in kindergarten was such a priority and so important, here we have our child who's sitting in a classroom all day long, completely isolated, can't connect, cannot speak. Nobody can speak with him. Carter, it's frustrating because Carter walked into school with regards to having some signing ability, and we very quickly watched him regress. So from a mental health capacity, we seen him change, his personality change. He was in a daycare system where he was actually, along with all of his daycare buddies, were learning sign language. So he went from a daycare setting where he was there and they were doing all their skits and their plays and all their books and their games with sign language. He goes from a system like that to a school where we thought it would be the same. This is how naive we were. We actually thought, if you're doing it in daycare, clearly you're going to do it in a school system where you have to learn. He started school and it was non-existent. And just to put this into some context, when the Newfoundland and Labrador School for the Deaf closed in 2010, before it closed, there used to be a program that was developed and created specifically to help preschool students learn sign language along with their families. So the families also learn American Sign Language. So you would not be in a situation where the child would be excluded or feel isolated and would start school already with a foundation. Our child never started school with any foundation because government had dropped the ball long before he started kindergarten.
Yeah. So go ahead, Graydon.
So when you say that, you talk to the teacher beforehand or visited people beforehand before he started school, so you were given the impression that his needs would be taken care of and there would be someone there to work with him for a lot more time than you saw after a couple of weeks into it.
Yeah, absolutely. That was the impression we had. And again, I have that guilt. I'll always carry the rest of my life in not asking the right questions and being too trusting. Clearly, we're not trusting now. We question everything to do with our son's education because we've learned that you cannot trust the people making the decisions for your children. I would encourage any parent of any child, deaf or hearing, if you have a concern about your child's education, question the people delivering that education. Do not trust that the people who are allegedly the experts are actually the experts, because the people making the decisions for deaf children have no background in deaf education at all. And that's a reality. And that's scary.
Yeah, Todd, I'm going to be honest with you. I know that, you probably do feel some guilt, but personally, I don't think you should be feeling guilt because I don't think your expectation was unreasonable, to be honest with you. If you had entered this meeting and, thought that they were going to promise you the world and extra things that, a student doesn't quote unquote deserve, then I understand some guilt there. But we're talking about the basics of education here, right? And you mentioned the School for the Deaf, which closed, you said, in 2010. So, I guess we were told, maybe the demand wasn't there. It was obviously about money at the time. Were those programs and stuff folded into the public school system, do you feel?
Well, I'll take that one. When the school for the deaf was closed, Darren King, who was the education minister at the time, issued a press release on August 2nd of 2010. And in that press release, he committed that all existing sports at the Newfoundland School for the Deaf would be maintained, and all current and future deaf students had nothing to fear about a loss of service. Everything would be maintained. And quite frankly, in hindsight, that was just lip service.
Yeah.
That was just to take the sting of closing the school for the deaf. And one of the reasons they said they closed the school for the deaf is because there was a declining enrollment. What Mr. or Darren King didn't say was there was a declining enrollment because they were not allowing referrals. So it's hard to have new students entering into the school for the deaf if you're not allowing any. Like, we have spoken to deaf itinerants who were referring students, for example, from the Marystown area, and they were denied entry into the school for the deaf. So it's hard to have new students if you're not allowing any new students. So they wanted to manufacture a reason to close the school, and they did.
So Todd, when you say a student or a family was denied access to the school for the deaf, I mean, if they had a student that was deaf, on what basis could they be denied? What criteria did you have to meet to get accepted?
Well, it lines up with the inclusive model, which started, as you might recall, a year before the School for the Deaf closed. So in 2009 is when the inclusion system had started in our province. And so this was kind of an introduction to bringing deaf students from the School for the Deaf in mainstream hearing schools, which are not developed nor designed for deaf children. They're losing their culture, they're losing their language, they're losing their role models and their peers. And then you expect them to thrive? How is that possible? So the children, the students who were probably older, maybe just about finished graduating, they might have been okay, as hard as it still probably was on them. But when you look at Carter, who's starting nothing. He has no foundation. He has no peers. He has no role models. He has no language. How does a child like that get to a point where he's going to have a quality education if not given the resources to get there?
And to give it context, like last year when the schools were closed because of COVID-19, right? All children were out of school. And there was a lot of people concerned about their children. And I made a post on Deaf Children Matter, our Facebook page, and said, if you're a parent of a hearing child, you're probably concerned about, having no access to a teacher. You're concerned about your child falling behind in their studies. You're worried about your child being socially isolated because of COVID-19 and school closure. Well, if you're worried about all those things, that's my normal. That's the things I'm worried about in regular times. Because if you're a parent of a deaf child, that's your normal. But last year, it really got driven home because hearing children were being affected. Hearing children were having the same experience that my child is expected to just accept as being normal.
There's so much talk, you'll probably recall, and there still is, about mental health. How is this impacting our students' mental health? They have to be with their peers. They have to have the socialization. And so it's so frustrating from our perspective, because we have been screaming and begging and pleading, and I cried endless tears in front of administrators, in front of government, in front of the school board, begging for help for my child for years. And we have gotten hardly nowhere. This is the first year he's actually getting some progress. But it's funny because I just put a post on Facebook tonight, and I don't have very many good night's sleeps, I'll be honest. And what keeps me awake is the fact that I think about Carter's future, and I think about how much damage has been done to him, how far behind he is, because he's been deprived of a language. He has been deprived of a language through neglect. And people knew the difference. We've got so much, we haven't even talked about it, but we're going into a hearing. In 2017, when we were not getting any help after speaking with countless people, administrators, and spoke to the school district and government, we realized that we need to go further with this, because this was Carter's human rights to be able to have an equitable education to that of hearing children. And it simply wasn't happening. How can you look at a child who you have sit in a classroom all day long and not give them a teacher to teach them. In what world is that okay? So it was completely acceptable, and we knew it wasn't. So we fought for him, and we opened up a human rights complaint.
Okay, so let's go back, and I will remember the being an educator. I will remember the inclusive model of education, and there was all kinds of talk and everything. And of course, some people had the impression, well, what it means is that all students, no matter what their needs, they're going to be in with the regular classroom. But that's where the problem lies, is that you take students with special needs and exceptionalities and you move them into a universal classroom. However, therein lies, and I remember the NLTA, and back when I was on the provincial executive, I remember talking about the inclusive model. But yes, it's fine to say we're going to include them, but there's no point unless the resources are there to meet the needs of the students that's being included.
Absolutely. I like, what really frustrates us is that the government appears to define inclusion as physical inclusion. So if you go to your child's school and you look through the door of the classroom and he or she is physically sitting there, then we're being inclusive because you can see your child's there. Whether or not that child is succeeding academically or being included socially, doesn't matter. They're physically in the classroom. That's all that matters. And I always call inclusion the illusion of inclusion, because it's a joke. It really is a joke. And, you know, there was a task force, a premier's task force on improving education outcomes in 2017. We made a submission. Various other people's made submissions detailing the problems with deaf education. And not one single thing went in the 82 recommendations of how to improve education. Deaf education was not mentioned once in 82 recommendations. So, I mean, what does that tell you exactly?
Yeah.
It doesn't scream that there's a priority.
So, Kimberly, take us back to the day when you guys, and I hear Todd saying, you know, we realized we didn't ask the right questions, whatever. So take us. So right now, Carter is what, grade 4?
Yes, and he just turned 10 in February. He's in grade 4.
Okay, so take us back to the time in his kindergarten year that you realized our child is not, his needs are not being met. He's not getting what he needs to get to succeed.
Well, you know what? If I was to start from the beginning, we'd be here, you know, weeks from now. The amount of situations that happened whereby his classroom teacher had to call me because he didn't understand what Carter was saying to him. We have endless stories of where Carter was actually sitting in the classroom all day long trying to tell his teacher, I'm cold, I need a sweater, I need a jacket. And his teacher calls me at the end of the day saying, I think there's something wrong with Carter's arm because he keeps hitting the bottom of his wrist. This is a sign, if you're wearing clothes, long sleeve shirt, okay? So something as simple as being able to just understand what a child's needs are wasn't being met. My child sat in the classroom all day long freezing, okay? So there's worse stories than that. That's probably the most mild story. And it's frustrating because this teacher and he, you know, I'll give him what he's owed and deserved. He was a great teacher for hearing children. He was a phenomenal teacher. And I got nothing but good to say about this man. Really nice guy. He just was put in an impossible situation because he was not qualified nor trained to work with and teach a deaf child. He told us that he cannot assess Carter. He told us that he could not communicate with Carter. So how dare government and how dare the school district put that in place in the kindergarten year where full day kindergarten becomes a priority, and my child is being damaged by that decision.
So where have we moved, Todd? Where have we moved from that time to 2021? Where are we now? What has been the shift? Anything in your favor?
Well, in 2017, in the spring of 2017, after almost his entire kindergarten year trying to get some traction with meeting with everyone that we could meet with, we didn't get any traction. And my wife and I finally made the extreme decision to go to a human rights complaint because we felt that would force at least some action. They would have to deal with it. They couldn't just give us lip service like they had been doing. So we filed a human rights complaint. We ended up going into a voluntary resolution process, which I can't speak too much about because there's a confidentiality with it. other than to say that we had 4 meetings that didn't produce a result. And to give you the setting of, and this is not breaking confidentiality, but going to the first mediation meeting, we were told by the Human Rights Commission, it's going to be an informal chat with people from the district and the department to try to hammer out a solution, right? So again, being really naive about how this works, Kim and I showed up at this meeting, just two ordinary people, and we walk into a boardroom full of people with their lawyers, and we're against this army of people armed with lawyers, and we're just ordinary people. And that's what we faced in the first mediation meeting. And the entire human rights process is inherently unfair. I'll say that even though we're still in this process, it's inherently unfair. Because if you are trying to prosecute a case against an entity that has more money than you, you are on an uphill battle because they will just outspend you. Like, for example, the English school district has a lawyer that bills at $400 per hour. Now, we are in a province that's strapped for money, apparently, but yet the district sees it worthy to hire a private law firm at a cost of $400 per hour to justify the discrimination of a 6-year-old boy, right? I mean, it's insane. It's hard to stomach. And especially when I have to go out and I have to get my own lawyer, and we're after spending up over almost $14,000 of our own money. And yet my taxes has to pay for their lawyer. Right now, there's no less than 4 lawyers working against us. The department has 3, the district has 1. And I mean, how are you supposed to fight that as an ordinary person? How? I mean, the Human Rights Commission, it's a joke. It really is, because it is inherently stacked against the little guy. It's just, we seem to be the anomaly because we're willing to sell our house if we have to. We will see this thing out, and we will bring the people to accountability. And I don't care if I have to sell this shirt off my back. We will never back down. And so to flash forward to where we are right now, the mediation's ended. We decided we're not getting anywhere with mediation. They're not going to budge from their position. We're not budging from our position. So it got referred to an investigation. And
can I interject there? Can I interject? When you say they're not going to budge, who are you referring to?
The Newfoundland English School District and the Department of Education. They are co-respondents to the human rights complaint. So last month on the 6th of April, our case was referred to the human rights commissioners, who have determined there's sufficient grounds to proceed to a formal board of inquiry on Carter's case. Now, we're just waiting to have the case, an adjudicator appointed and a date set. So just to give you a background on how that process works, it's very much like court. You cannot refuse to testify. If you do, you will be brought there by the sheriff's office, because that was the first question we asked our lawyer. Well, if we ask these people from district or department to testify and they say no, what can we do? And our lawyer said, well, they can try that, but they will be brought there in handcuffs by the sheriff's office, and you're sworn in under oath. So it's really a very formal process that's going to give very little wiggle room for the people that have been very disingenuous to us to date to really get out of it, because we have a mountain of documents that are going to be very hard to explain away.
Yeah. Todd, just before I give it back to Rudy, just one other thing. So I don't know if you've seen it, but a few weeks back, I noticed there was an advertisement put out by the NLESD, and they're calling for applications for an itinerant for hearing impaired or deaf children itinerant and vision impaired itinerant. Did you see that? And what does that mean to you?
Yeah, that's for the director. They hired a director about 1.5 years ago, a director of deaf and hard of hearing education. And now that person is finished in August. She's leaving the position, so they're hiring a replacement. But one of the things I want to touch on, because you brought something to mind, is one of the things you have to be cognizant of when they do post a position for a teacher, and this is one of the sticking points we have in our human rights complaint. They will post a position and say, knowledge of American Sign Language preferred. Now, if you're going to work with a child whose first language is only American Sign Language, that's not a preferred requirement. That's a mandatory requirement.
Yeah.
We spoke to Dean Ingram at the Newfoundland and Labrador Teachers Association, and we said, Dean, for a hearing child, is English specified as a requirement in a job description for a teacher designated to teach a hearing child in English? And he said, no, it's not. And we looked at him kind of funny. And he said, it's not because it's so inherently obvious. It doesn't need to be stated. But we cannot get the district to move away from this preferred thing, because by saying it's a preferred requirement, that means you can hire anybody. You can hire somebody with no American Sign Language knowledge because it's only a preferred requirement. It's not mandatory.
So I'm assuming that the American Sign Language was the program that was used at School for the Deaf?
In Canada, there's no such thing as Canadian Sign Language. In Canada, we use American Sign Language. In Quebec, there's LSQ, which is Langue de Sign de Quebec, I believe. And there's some indigenous sign languages as well. Now, other nationalities, there's an Australian Sign Language. There's a British Sign Language. Other countries have their own distinct sign languages. And one of the things that I really don't think the district and department really gets through their head is American Sign Language is actually a legitimate language. I think they really do think it's just gestures people who are deaf make to get by. I don't think they appreciate it that it's a distinct language with its own format, its syntax, its grammar, its vocabulary. They just think it's something deaf people. It's an ad hoc solution for deaf people. They have no appreciation for it as a language.
Todd,
sorry, just
no, go ahead.
because it popped in my head, and it's one of the things that infuriates me, and it goes with the whole language piece, is that, just to give you an example, in kindergarten, when we were told that he was going to have a teacher of the deaf and all these great services, I was most worried about him having a student assistant to be able to help him, and he would have American Sign Language, because I didn't want my child to be with somebody who couldn't communicate with him. So I was most worried about that. And when I found out on day one, when the bus came and picked him up and she was on the bus, that was my first question was, do you have American Sign Language? Actually, that's a lie. I was at school because it was his first day. I brought him to school. And so I asked her at school, do you have American Sign Language? And she said, well, I did the program. I did the course over a year ago. So, she said, I actually have never used it. I've never had a reason to use it. But she said, I did tell HR, Human Resources, that when they offered me the position, and they said it wouldn't be a problem. I stood there biting my tongue, because I said, you know what, I'm going to give this person, the benefit of the doubt. It's Carter's first day of school. I just met this person. Let's see where this goes. But unfortunately, very quickly, it got back to me that this person did not have any knowledge of American Sign Language. So Carter was literally in a situation where somebody was hired for him to help him with something that was only on paper, and because district did not care enough to actually investigate it or to listen to the person and say, I've never used this.
And at that time, they were not testing student assistants, and they're still not testing teachers. So you could be hired as a deaf itinerant to work with a deaf student and not be tested for ASL fluency. It's insane. It really is. Because we keep saying, if you want to be a French immersion teacher, you have to do a standardized test called DELF, which is a French acronym. It's a test for people who are going into the French civil service in France. So you have to score a certain percentage on DELF to prove your fluency in the language. And if you're going to become a French immersion teacher in Newfoundland, you have to do the DELF test. But if you're going to work with a deaf child, there's no such equivalent there is equivalent, but it's just not performed on teachers working with deaf students. So you could literally have somebody with no American Sign Language knowledge working with a student that requires it. And what's really, really mind-blowing, and you're going to be really surprised on this one, the Masters of Deaf Education is offered by 3 universities in Canada, Mount St. Vincent, York University, and UBC. They are the only 3 universities that offer a Masters of Deaf Education. All 3 master's programs contain virtually no American Sign Language. So you can come out of a Masters of Deaf Education and not know any sign language. It's like getting a master's in French and not speaking any French. It's insane.
Yeah, there's so much being fixated now on children who are wearing cochlear implants. And well, if they're wearing a cochlear implant, then obviously they must be able to hear. So obviously they must be able to talk. And so it's been a huge roadblock for us, because we've been trying to educate people that just because if you have cochlear implants does not mean you actually hear. Because what my child has access to, and that's what I refer to it as. He has access to sound. He's not a hearing child. He'll never be a hearing child. And he's never been able to develop the ability to speak orally. So there will always be children like that. And for them to not be prepared, and they knew years in advance of him coming to school, for him, when he started school in 2016, for them not to be prepared is, they are liable for that.
So like I've always said, the problem with cochlear implants, they're a blessing and a curse at the same time. Like we had Carter implanted, we agreed to implant him when he was 10 months old. And I don't regret for a second doing it because he wants to wear his implants. He wants access to sound. When a battery dies and it needs to be replaced, he tells us that he can't hear and he wants to hear. But what he hears is not what we hear. So what he hears is very mechanical, very electronic sounding. And if he's in an environment where there's maybe 3 different conversations going on at the same time, where you or I with native hearing could filter out different conversations and focus on one conversation, all that sound goes into his implant and gets converted to an electronic signal. And when it gets converted back into a signal to his brain, it's just a jumble of sound because it's all these things being layered on top of each other. So
does his teacher wear the device around their neck that goes with his implant? Or
yep. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
But you're still going to pick up a lot of ambient sounds. Like one of the things we've had problems with Carter in hearing classroom is that there's so much background noise. If the classroom's really noisy, his implant picks up all that sound and then converts it and it mixes with what he's trying to hear. So it's really, really tiring for somebody with a cochlear implant to hear because they have to filter out and listen to so much static to actually pick out what they're trying to hear. So, unfortunately, government has kind of seized on cochlear implants as like curing deafness, right? We've cured deaf people. There's not going to be any more deaf people because if you're diagnosed as being deaf or found to be deaf at birth, we're going to implant you and you're cured, right? There's no more deaf people. And that's not the way a cochlear implant is. That's a complete misunderstanding of the technology. It's as great as it is, it's an aid. At the end of the day, it's not like if you're farsighted, you go to the doctor and you get some prescription for contact lenses or eyeglasses and you have 20/20 vision. That's not the way a cochlear implant works. It doesn't restore native hearing. It gives you access to sound in a very minimal way. Now, Carter doesn't know any difference because that's just normal.
Yeah, like a wheelchair gives someone with mobility issues, it gives them better mobility, but it doesn't make them walk.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know if that's a good example. That's just off the top of my head. I'm wondering now, and I mean maybe this is not a fair question or whatever, but I mean, have you guys thought about like the long term? And I'm just I'm just heart wrenched here listening to your guys' story and Todd, what you just said there then about the lawyers in the boardroom, $400 an hour to fight a 6-year-old child from getting an education. Like, I mean, that just, that's the mic drop moment for me right there. That should be on a bumper sticker. But like, I just think about like now I watch all the government, press conferences and the COVID updates. And I mean, there's always that person down in the corner now doing the sign language and I mean, government's really taking on this accessibility thing, full tilt. I mean, have you guys thought about, like what high school is going to be like for Carter? What university is going to be like for him? If he's having these struggles now with elementary school, I mean, what's the future going to look like?
Well, that's one of the challenges we have because one of the stumbling blocks of our human rights complaints is we cannot get a commitment on anything. We cannot get a commitment on anything in future past grade 6. So, if you had a parent, if you were a parent of a hearing child, and I said to you, well, I'm only going to guarantee you a teacher till grade 6, and after that, maybe you're not going to get one. You wouldn't be too happy as a parent.
Yeah.
But that's what we're expected to accept as a mediated settlement.
Yeah.
I mean, it's insane.
Yeah.
Hence, that's why we're going to a hearing now, because It's not appropriate, it's not right, and is nowhere near acceptable. And, you know, I want to point out too that it's not just about Carter. I mean, we're doing this, obviously, we're talking about Carter because we can, but there's more than just Carter that this impacts and this affects. And so we're doing this for the other children who are deaf as well and have a right to this education. And no child should be treated this way. No child should be neglected and harmed. This is their future, as you said. This is their future. And Carter, I know for a fact, has forever been changed by this, by what has happened to him.
And you know, look at this context. We live in the St. John's area, right? And the reality is, and people outside St. John's mightn't like this, but this is the reality. Everything in Newfoundland and Labrador is as good as it's going to be in the St. John's area. The shopping is as good as it's going to be. The roads are as good as they're going to be. Healthcare is as good as they're going to be. Education's as good. So as you move further from St. John's, things get progressively worse. The roads are worse. Healthcare is worse. Everything's worse. So if we cannot get good service in the best part of the province to get service, you can imagine if you live in, I don't know, Virgil somewhere, good luck having a deaf child. Good luck to you.
Yeah. Where, I mean, I don't know. I've got so many questions going through my mind. Graydon, you got anything?
I want to add this one thing before I forget it. Yeah. And it came to my mind a while ago when we were talking about politicians. I'll tell you, I'll punctuate how disingenuous politicians are with deaf education. Darren King, in May of 2010, was asked a direct question by then leader of the Liberal Party, Yvonne Jones. Is there any intention to close the school for the deaf? He responded, and you can go to Hansard. I can actually send you a copy to Hansard. It's actually in Hansard. I think it was May 27th or May 26th of 2010. He responded, we have no plans to do anything different with the School of the Deaf. We've always funded, we always will fund it. 2 months later, they closed the school for the deaf. He knew in May when he answered Yvonne Jones, he was closing it, and he lied.
Yeah.
He lied in the House of Assembly. He knew he was closing it.
He's not the first one to lie in the House of Assembly.
But that's how disingenuous politicians are to deaf children.
Yeah. So, Kimberly, what's Carter getting today in school? What assistance is he? What supports is he getting today?
So now he is in a classroom. You know, I'm going to just back up a bit because the thing that we have been fighting for and the thing that we've been asking for since day one is for Carter to have access to his language, access to the curriculum in his language, access to his culture, access to role models, which would be deaf role models, native people, native deaf people. I should have. That's a weird way to put it. And peers, deaf peers. That's what we've always asked for, and that's what he needed. Otherwise, he just simply is not going to thrive. So over the summer, this past summer, district did approach a number of families who had children that were trying to learn ASL and asked if we would be interested in having our children come together to be taught in one classroom. So that's where it stands right now. Carter is actually in a classroom with deaf peers and they all have deaf role models that are assistants in the classroom, language assistants, and they have 2 teachers of the deaf as well that work with the children that are fluent in ASL. So all the children are immersed in this, finally in a rich language environment, and it's great. And I will tell you firsthand that Carter is now coming home and he's just nonstop chatting. At the supper table, we can't get him to stop. We actually got to say, like, can you give your brother like a minute just to, tell us about his day? Because he's just a complete chatterbox now. And it's absolutely refreshing and enlightening to see our child finally blooming like this. It's unfortunate that he is so substantially behind academically, mentally, from an emotional perspective. There's some serious developments that have been delayed due to the fact that he was denied his language. And not only that, but we cannot get anyone to guarantee that this will continue on to the next school year. So here we are in a situation where we still are having to fight for our child to have a teacher this fall.
Like we always say, if you're the parent of a hearing child during the summer months, July and August, when your children are off from school, you're enjoying going to your cabin or taking a vacation. You don't worry if you have a hearing child. Am I going to have a teacher in September? You don't worry about that because it's a given, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the biggest concern you might have as a parent of a hearing child is the bus schedule going to be convenient? That's probably it, because you're going to have a school, you're going to have a teacher, you're going to have a classroom. It's all a given. But for us, we have no idea what Carter's next year looks like. We don't know if he'll have a teacher. We don't know if that teacher will have any sign language. We don't know the degree of sign language that person will know. They're not going to test because they don't test teachers. It's insane. Every year we have this hanging over us, this worry. So it's really hard to enjoy a summer holiday when you don't know in September if your child will have the basics to go back to school again.
So these improvements, sorry, Greg, these improvements that you've got now, I mean, it sounds like, like you said, he's interacting with his peers. He's got specialized teachers that are helping him and stuff. So you haven't got a commitment that says, okay, this is going to go on now for the rest of his education.
No,
this
we don't.
is just. So did this happen last year as well?
This is the first year
he's had that.
Yeah.
So the grade 4 was the first year he actually had true inclusive education.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I want to point out too that this is not the curriculum that all children get for grade 4. This is a modified curriculum because he's so far behind, as are the other children in his classroom. Because they're all suffering from the same thing, language deprivation. And so these children are not in a regular curriculum that all Newfoundland and Labrador children are receiving. So, I mean, it's so infuriating because this should never have happened.
So is he with other grade 4 students in this classroom that with the specialized teachers and stuff?
It's not all grade 4 students. There's one student that's in grade 7.
Okay.
There's one kindergarten student, a couple in grade 3, a couple in Carter's grade.
Yeah.
So they basically brought together students in this area into one classroom, and it's called a satellite classroom. The ironic thing is, this was proposed 4 years ago by deaf itinerant teachers, and it was rejected by the English school district.
Yeah.
Like this model was. Sorry.
What brought about this year? Do you think?
I would say 2 human rights complaints.
Yeah.
Because 2 students in that classroom, Carter being one, had open human rights complaints.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, I mean, quite frankly, they have a steering committee on deaf and hard of hearing education. And the only reason they created that committee is because we have been very public and very strong advocating for deaf children's rights, because it wasn't going to happen. If we are very confident that if we had stood by and just said, okay, they know what they're doing, Carter would still be getting 1.5 hours to 2 hours every 7 school days in grade 4. Because it's only because we've lobbied so hard to get what we've got that he's in the situation he's in. And unfortunately, that's going to be our reality till he leaves the school system, because there is no accountability. Carter belongs to a demographic that politically matters to nobody. It's just a demographic nobody cares about. Nobody cares about the deaf demographic, because deaf people will never win or lose an election for anybody. If all the deaf people vote Liberal, or they all vote PC, or they all vote Newfoundland Alliance, it doesn't matter, because no party is going to win or lose an election on deaf people. So nobody cares.
Yeah.
Politicians cater to big demographics. And if you happen to be belonging to a small demographic, well, too bad. That's just a reality. And there's no accountability in government. There's zero. Because if you try to challenge government, you better have some serious money to hire lawyers, because that's what you're going to be into. Because the first thing they're going to do is turn lawyers on you. Because
so I've noticed now this, and my hat's off to you for taking on this fight. And I know you're fighting for all children in Newfoundland and Labrador that find themselves in this situation. So back to you guys now. What you've done, you're in the midst of a case here now. It costs a lot of money. I think it says it's upwards to $50,000. You've already put $14-some thousand into it. Tell the people that's listening and who will listen to this podcast after tonight, if they want to help, what they can do, because I know you have a fundraiser of sorts ongoing.
Yeah, it's on GoFundMe.
Yeah, so we have a GoFundMe account called Help Carter Churchill to help raise donations. And also, if people want to help Carter and offset his legal fees, we're actually selling I love you keychains. The symbol for I love you in sign language is this. So we are selling keychains with that pendant, and people can actually contact us through Deaf Children Matter Facebook page if they're interested in buying one. They're $6 each, and we will mail them anywhere anywhere. Actually, we're after sending some to Europe. Yeah. We had somebody from Europe contact us looking for some, so we actually sent some to Europe. So we're trying everything we can, but at the end of the day, we have to do what we have to do. And I said to my father just a few days ago, when all this is over, I'm kind of getting a little emotional now. I want to be able to look Carter in his eyes and say, I did everything I could have done. Like, there's nothing I could have done differently. I took it as far as I could take it. There's nothing I could have done differently for you. I fought as hard as I could, and I want to be able to look him in his eyes and say that. And we're really hoping that this human rights complaint is really going to expose a lot of people know this problem exists, have known it existed for a long time, and have done nothing about it. And that's really going to be worth the $65,000 it's going to take us to prosecute this human rights hearing, to have certain people under oath and have to admit under oath they knew, and be able to confront them with documents that they are aware of, that they knew years ago. I mean, we have a document from the Janeway that was given to the English school district 2 years before Carter started school that indicated Carter needed American Sign Language. 2 years before he started school, English school district knew of Carter Churchill. And yet he starts school with a fraction of what a hearing child got. It's really frustrating, but we're determined to see it out. We're his parents, and you know what? We just have to do it. And unfortunately, it's taken an incredibly hard toll on our family. And I'll give you an example. Christmas 2019, just before that Christmas, we received a submission from the lawyer at the English school district, the person who makes the $400 an hour, of a document over 50 pages long that we had to respond to over Christmas holidays. So when our children would go to bed at Christmas, during Christmas week, we would stay up at night reviewing this 50-page document because we had to have a response back by the first week of January. That was our Christmas in 2019. We'll never get that Christmas back. That Christmas was taken from us. We've had 5 years of our life taken from us, 5 years of quality time we've been deprived of with our children, 5 years of quality time we haven't had with each other. That they've taken from us just because we had to fight for something that hearing child takes for granted and should really take for granted. But we can't. We have to fight tooth and nail to get it. And it's really taken a toll, but the more of a toll it takes, the more it hardens our resolve to see it out. We are determined to see it out, and we've gone so far now, we have to see it out.
So what numbers are you looking at across Newfoundland and Labrador of deaf children that need these supports?
The supports all differ just because everybody has a different, I guess, range of hearing loss. So there could be children that, might have just moderate or mild hearing loss to someone like Carter who has more severe and profound hearing loss. So because of that, their needs are going to be different, and it's going to look different in what they're going to get in school. But we know from the people that we have been interacting with, these children are not getting anything that they need. Up until this school year, all the children in this program were receiving just a couple of hours from a teacher of the deaf a day, and that only got changed, I think, in the last year after Carter got changed. And we've been so vocal and so public about it. Parents, expected more from their children if they were only getting an hour and a half every 7 days, as all of them were prior to that.
And to give you context, I mentioned earlier about as you move from St. John's, service gets worse and worse. In Labrador, as of last year, there was one deaf itinerant teacher in all of Labrador, and that person is supposed to cover all of Labrador. Now, Labrador is a pretty big place geographically, and I can't imagine how one teacher can cover all of Labrador. Yeah, I can't imagine one teacher covering Goose Bay. Yeah, to be honest, but and that's how bad it is. And everybody's just content to let it go. And if you don't speak up, there was a lady in Lab West. Her 2-year-old. She reached out to us about a year and a half, 2 years.
During the election too.
Yeah, it was during the election. She reached out to English School District for her 2-year-old son, and she was told, "Oh, we can't help you in preschool. Buy DVDs." That's what she was told.
YouTube.
Watch YouTube and buy DVDs to teach your child sign language because there's no support available for you. Even though it's early childhood development is part of the English or the Department of Education.
We've done ATIPs, and this will be probably my last point because I know we're running out of time. But we've done ATIPs where we've found exchange of emails where people have said, this is a human rights issue, and it's been brushed off like, well, we don't have to worry about that. Nobody ever goes anywhere with these human rights issues. The seriousness, the level of genuineness and care and concern that's been afforded to our child has been absolutely gut-wrenching, to be honest. And there's going to be changes going to happen, and it's going to happen hopefully this year at the trial.
I think we know of one human rights complaint where the parents gave up. They actually settled, and they said we just didn't have money to hire a lawyer, and they just gave up. And I think a lot of people give up in human rights complaints, not only on deaf education, but on a lot of things, because you really left the wolves when you are fighting the government. They can wear you down with their liars because they can outspend you and you can't. So, with us, we are a bit of an anomaly. We are determined to see this thing out, and we're not going to go away. They might have beaten down other people, but they will not beat down us.
Yeah.
I assure you. So stay tuned. In the fall, we're hoping to get our hearing date. Stay tuned for more updates because we are going to see this out. We anticipate the hearing being about 2 weeks long, and we are calling our list of witnesses now that will be under oath, and all testimony will be under oath. So they're going to have very little wiggle room to lie.
Yeah. Guys, like you said, we are running out of time, but I do want to go through a couple comments here because a lot of people are just weighing in on all this. Nicole says this is unreal. I totally agree, Nicole. Where's the other one I had here? Ruby says, "Oh my God, this is unbelievable." This one here. This is a guy. Actually, he's from my neck of the woods. Chad said, "Proud of you guys. It's one heck of a fight." I actually know Chad.
Me too.
Chad,
I actually, you know what? I visited with Chad when he was a young boy in the school for the deaf.
Chad is doing incredible now for him, for himself,
and we know Chad as well, and we're so proud of Chad as well because he is a fantastic example of what deaf children can do.
Yeah,
deaf
absolutely.
children can be something. And, we did a presentation to the Board of Trustees, a video presentation. We weren't allowed to present in public at their meeting in person, so they let us do a video. And I said, you know what? Children who aren't supported when they're young, deaf children who aren't supported at being young, they have very little education, very little opportunity for employment in future. And people will look at deaf children who become deaf adults with poor education as failures because they're deaf. And it has nothing to do with being deaf. It has everything to do with not being educated. And Chad is just a great example of what can be achieved by a deaf person if they receive the same access to an education as a hearing child. Yeah. So we're super proud of Chad. Like he's just awesome. And we couldn't be prouder of him if he was our own son.
For sure. Guys, I got one more question for you. And with this, we'll call it a night. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot more conversations going forward. But I mean, I don't know how much you follow politics, obviously quite a bit, but outside of your issues and stuff that you're fighting for, I mean, we saw the Green Report come out this week, and everything is all up in the air, and we've got a financial crisis, and everyone is saying Newfoundland is sinking the fastest kind of thing. I look at you guys and I just think about what you're going through and what you're fighting for. And part of the reason, and I guess the biggest question in the back of my mind is, why in the world are you doing that? Why haven't you guys said to yourselves, well, you know what, we're better off moving to Halifax or Toronto or somewhere where we can find the supports and we don't have to fight tooth and nail for them. So
it's literally
here.
It's literally no better anywhere else. There's nowhere to go. We're talking to a lady in New Brunswick. She actually has a human rights complaint, same issues against the Atlantic Provinces Special Education Authority, which governs deaf education in the Maritimes. She has the exact same problems, and she has an open human rights complaint. There's nowhere to go in Canada. Everywhere in Canada, deaf education is a disaster. So there's nowhere to go. So it's either you give up on it or you fight, and we're going to fight.
Yeah.
Wow.
And to get to your point about the Moya Green report, I've always said, and I believe in my heart, that the only department of government in Newfoundland and Labrador, and even in Canada, the only department that gets full funding in every single budget is the Department of Wasting Money. The Department of Wasting Money gets full funding every single budget because there's no end to money that can be wasted. We just saw a news story last week about the ED, the executive director of the Francophone School District, renting Audi A5 cars and staying at the Ritz-Carlton. Why not? It's on your nickel.
Yeah.
Seriously, if there was any accountability in government for the money being spent, then we'd probably be a lot better off. It's insane the amount of waste.
Yeah, someone commented here and said, use the $400 an hour and reopen the school for the deaf.
It's insane the amount of waste, and it's all levels of government. And you can't even say, well, it's only the Liberals or it's only the PCs. They're all equally wasteful, all of them.
Yeah.
Because it's inherently wasteful in government. I mean, the English School District, if you have time to look it up, there was an audit done by the Auditor General in September of 2018. It was so shocking at the English School District that the Auditor General recommended the police investigate it. That's how bad the finances were at the English School District. And that's public domain. You can actually go in and get it.
Was that the $500 shovels or something? Or
well, people were getting luxury jackets, and people were getting snow clearing at their houses, and they were buying all kinds of snow tires that didn't fit any of the district's cars. I mean, it was a disaster. But there's lots of money for that. No money for our son, but lots of money for that.
Yeah, exactly.
And that happens every day.
Yeah, and I mean, it's scandalous, to be honest with you. And you guys are doing an incredible job, and incredible work, bringing this stuff to light. You're to be commended tenfold. Someone here, I echo the last comment I'll share. Travis says, "Don't stop fighting." So, I mean, this has been inspirational, to be honest with you guys. My jaw's on the floor, and I'm almost speechless to all this. So, great work on your guys' part, and all the best. We're with you. We're here fighting as well. We're in your corner. We'll link up to to your website where you can buy the keychains and help, and your GoFundMe and stuff, and hopefully people can, if you've got a spare dollar to send, then send it along to these folks and help them fight this good fight. Todd and Kim, you guys are incredible, I gotta say, and thank you so much for coming on tonight and sharing your story with us.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, guys. We'll talk again soon.
Have a great day. Yeah, have a great day, everybody. Thank you all for tuning in. It's been a pleasure. And next week, Graydon and I will be here, same time, Wednesday night, 7:30 p.m. Whether you're watching this live now or you're watching it later, please come along, tune in. I'm sure there's going to be a lot to talk about then as well, Graydon.
Yeah, we're going to be focusing on, of course, the PERT report. We're going to be talking about. We'll be reacting to the speech that's going to be given tomorrow by the Premier on the report, and a whole lot of things that are Newfoundland and Labrador.
For sure. Have a great evening, folks. Thank you all for tuning in, and stay safe.
Good night.